Aryan, Hamitic, Semitic, all names created by the eurocentric academia, used to write themselves into history. Today we'll be going over the origins of these terms, and by the end of this video we will have gone step by step over the various ways that they created the foundation for this to prosper. Let's get it.
I've been looking this way ever since I remember, and it ain't gonna change, so I don't care what them people say. I will forever be this way. I will forever be this way.
The term Caucasian was created to allow the Eurocentrics to attach themselves to histories in which they did not participate, in which they were irrelevant. It's important for us to note before we start that prior to the creation of these terms, the world that they described was not imprinted on the European consciousness, and they did not describe themselves in the ways with which they do now, which is to be the cousin of every Assyrian and ancient Babylonian they can find. I noticed that when a discussion comes up of the origins of the white supremacy agenda, the Eurocentric agenda, not much stock is put into the origins of these things, and a lot of it is ignored by the Afrocentrics, by so-called black people, and a lot of times people go along with it. Let's get into this. We might as well say that the Gottingen School of History was a very infamous location, and it has been the bane of our existence for a long time. All of this Caucasian and Hamitic theories, all this stuff was really invented by 5 people. The Gottingen School of History was established in the late 18th century. This was a time when they were early in developing their white supremacist theory so they can get all the money. They used this school as a cornerstone in their foundation to create a phony history that has been presented to us. They created a scientific basis of everything that we know now. And it didn't need to be based in reality, it just needed to be based upon their own authority. And it was at this school that they got together in the 1700s to create phony terms like Caucasians, red race, all of that. And let's make it clear right now at the beginning of this video that an Ethiopian was considered black at that time.
Caucasian, 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 Caucasian. All those are black, Caucasian.
2 Eurocentric so-called academics by the name of Blumenbach and Minor created terminologies that they were then able to use to insert Europeans into a history that they noticed they were not a part of. Remember that this school was established to create a universal history of the world. And when they started looking at that history, they were not impressed with themselves. And so it was time to create evidence. Let's look at how they did that. These 2 Eurocentrics, Blumenbach and Minor, they created the fake Caucasian name, which didn't exist then. This was one of the founding and original centers that they created their history, where they studied their history, created their own peer-reviewed research, peer review being them and their friends. They wrote this stuff to each other, they didn't write it to anyone else. They started finding things there that they didn't like, and we're taking a look at some of that stuff right now. They were running into things, they were having problems. Almost Nefertari was an Ethiopian princess. They have the earliest images of Negroes, and there were many things that disturbed them deeply. Livingston saw Negro Assyrian monuments, and this was very distressing. And it was very disturbing considering that none of these things was on their consciousness before, but it wasn't until they saw the artifacts and saw what these places really had that they decided that they wanted to become interested and become ancient Assyrians and fake Babylonians. The Europeans were just discovering the world at that time. They had never really been anywhere or seen anything. This is why they called it the Age of Discovery, when they were sailing around bothering the Native Americans. And it was all very new, so that's why they wanted to create these universities to study the world. So about 1734, they were about ready. They start conducting their published research and lectures. And this was all about 1734. They had got this school established over at the university. By the 1770s, they were ready to get up to some devilry. They had observed the ancient Babylonians and Assyrians, these Ethiopian kingdoms that were over there. And it was time to make them no longer Ethiopian. It was time for them to be Semitic. Semitic, a fake and phony term that they created. And this was a phony term they invented in the 1770s that did not exist prior to that. No one was called Semitic. No one went by that term. And there was no sort of classification in the world's consciousness of that. But the Europeans needed it. They needed to steal history, so they went ahead and created Semitic. And once they started doing that, it allowed the Eurocentrics to start developing many other theories and adding on to the story, which if you've been following on this channel lately, I've been going over that in slow motion, how they constantly change their stories up and never give an explanation why they did that. Moving on, they would go on to interweave different people's languages and cultures and bend these into a Eurocentric viewpoint where they would start creating their own evidence. And then eventually they would just straight up add Semitic to the religions that they looked up to, which were the Abrahamic religions, started calling that stuff Semitic religions. Now the events that went on in those areas were nowhere near anything Germanic or British. And so they had to make sure that they were as close as possible. And one of those ways that they did that was with the son of Ham. Now this son of Ham section, let's pay close attention to this. First and foremost, they went ahead and used this whole Ham thing to create several different theories, all simultaneously running parallel at the same time. Remember, they were writing these things to each other. They were not writing this to anyone black or anyone outside of their little circles. They were the ones reading this, not us. These academics created terms like Caucasian and caucasoid. There is no such thing as a Caucasian, and there is no such thing as a caucasoid. I think that it's time that we get off that, but we can't because they have successfully commandeered everyone into the Caucasian corner, and we have no choice but to call stuff that sometime. And it's all by design. Aryan, Semitic, Hamitic, all phony names that have no scientific basis whatsoever. But let's get back to Ham. Right now I'm going to go over 5 different ways in which they've corrupted Ham. First, Blumenbach and Miner created these terminologies for race, which included Ethiopian meaning black. Ethiopian was a black person. You fast forward and you go over to the slaves picking cotton right in North America. Well, they told those slaves that you got to be a slave because you're the son of Ham. Right? You're the son of Ham. The curse of Ham. Remember that? At the same time, their Hebrew friends are creating encyclopedias saying that Ham was not the father of the Negroes. And this implies that an Ethiopian was white. All right, so they were able to do that. And so they're able to tell you that a Sudanese person is in fact not white, except for when it's time to be a Nubian slave, of course. But I digress. They go on to create this term Hamites. And it was at this point that they just decided to just magically turn Ham into a 100% white man, and they'll just totally forget that they were telling the slaves that they were the sons of Ham. It wasn't until they saw the riches of Egypt and how amazing that the artifacts were that they decided that Ham could no longer be a black person or associated with their Negro slaves. So they create other fake terms like Nubian. But at various times, a Nubian was also a Caucasian, quote unquote. In fact, when Reisner discovered earliest Nubian artifacts, he said obviously this was a Caucasian civilization because of how amazing they were. But when it was time for the Nubians to be a Negro, then they remind you that the Nubian was a Negro. But when they find some Nubian gold and find some temple complex somewhere, then they might make their own painting where the Nubian is a Caucasian. And to this day, we still have white supremacists and Eurocentrics running around talking about the great white takeover of ancient Nubia. moving on, they would go on to create even more fake terms. For instance, originally, the Polynesians and the Chinese were all bundled together as Mongoloid. Here we run into massive hypocrisy.
Caucasian, 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 Caucasian. Although they're black, Caucasian.
Was not considered a Negro at all. And you guys see the picture on your screen. You can see the caption where they say that she has nothing in common with any so-called Negro. That shows you how insane these people were. The truth of the matter is, if you were a so-called black person that they approved of, you were not considered Negro. But if you were one they did not approve of, then you were Negro. That was the reality of the situation. That's how it continues to be today. And so we've seen several instances where they use this whole Hamite thing as just a reason to create stories. And so we need to reiterate that this whole son of Ham thing, this whole Hamite thing is 100% phony. It's not real. It wasn't based on anything. They went in and saw that they were not present in ancient history and needed to change Ham from a so-called black man to a white man. And nowadays they will tell you that they never did that and that they never said that anybody was white. So now, you know, we live in a day and age where they just totally just say anything now. But getting back to where we were, when we move up in time from the 18th century to the 19th century, then they start talking about almost Nefertari's an Ethiopian princess. They talk about all sorts of Negro Egyptian kings while simultaneously creating and developing their theories to then destroy all of that and make sure that everything was a so-called Caucasian. And it's important that you change all that to something that never existed in the first place. Change it to something that never existed in the first place. So now you have extra work to debunk pretty much two different trains of thought at the same time. I made a video where I went over a lot of the old things that they were saying in the 19th century, the things that they were writing amongst each other and to each other. And we saw clearly that they knew they were not present in ancient history and that they weren't even close to the level of the Babylonians, the Assyrians, Ethiopians, Egyptians, or anyone else for that matter. Some of the people that wrote these things were some of the most respected Europeans in their respected countries. And some of the people that wrote these things were some of the most respected Europeans of that time, saying some incredible things. An example of where I'm going with this is if you do any sort of research on what is the oldest European city that is not Greek or Roman, and that is something that I researched for a long time, and I realized that there is no such thing as an ancient European city. Now, you can go to West Africa and find plenty of evidence and study about ancient super cities that existed even at the time of the late New Kingdom of Egypt. And these places developed into places like ancient Ghana and other locations and kingdoms. Whereas when you go and look at ancient Europe, it's hard, actually impossible to find evidence of an actual city that you can go and study and visit as a tourist attraction or even as an archaeologist that exists outside of the whole Greek and Roman thing. This is why they worship all of that so much, because it's where they claim they start. But anyone that studies any of that knows that these Greeks and Romans had absolutely nothing to do with Germanic barbarians or anyone running around in England or France or any of those places. And this has bothered them so much. This is why they are so much more interested in Africa and Asia than they are in Europe. In European history, it's all about dragging everyone else into their thing. And so they create terms like Caucasian and Hamitic and Aryan and white people and this, that, and the third, and then breaking down black people into 50 sections. So that way they're able to attach their motorcycle sidecar to the Caucasian motorcycle, and then they can ride alongside all of that. When in reality, if you're a white supremacist, eurocentric watching me today, you had nothing to do with ancient Assyria, ancient Babylon, ancient Ethiopia, ancient Egypt, or anything else ancient for that matter, except for your respected tribes, which are mentioned in the old writings. But instead, they get outsized and they want to be everything. And we all know how these people are, do a lot of projection, and how they are massive hypocrites. So they say, oh, you're always trying to steal history all the time, after it's already been stolen by Caucasian, Semitic, Nubian, and everything else. And when we go in to clean up after them, then it's considered quote unquote stealing. And so they get nervous. They've been demoralized lately. Nowadays, they just straight up admit something wasn't white, but then they go on and say it was Caucasian, or it was quote unquote Arab. They hate the Arabs any other day except when they open up a history book, then an Arab is their cousin, which is simply not true, and it never was. And so we see in real time how they created these phony terms. To this day, they continue to use these same ridiculous terms and throw them at us. And then we have sellouts in the so-called Afrocentric community that also subscribe to all this stuff. And they all drag us down with this Hamitic, with this Semitic. I've had black people coming to me with Hamitic stuff. I'm like, brother, there's no such thing as Hamitic. Time to have a good day with that. It's nothing more than something created by the Eurocentrics over in Germany. Germany, England, and France were all riding together, and it's always a trifecta. Let's remember that the fake Nefertiti bust comes from Germany. Let's remember that the fake Himiunu statue also is in Germany. Let's not forget that the earliest European lineages in North Africa are not found until about 480 BC. This underscores what we've been saying this entire time, that there is no such thing as an ancient white person taking over and running around buck wild in North Africa. It's time to put that to sleep. Have a good night. There's no such thing as a great white takeover of North Africa in ancient times. That is not your homeland. That is our ancient homeland. And you simply were not there. And there simply is no evidence of your presence. Have a good day on that, Eurocentrics. Have a good night. Let's remember that the same people that said that the Polynesians and the Chinese are all together as the same race will look at a Sudanese person and say that that person is not black. And to this day, they have everyone running around participating in this. This, that, and the third is not black. We shouldn't be calling this Africa. It's called Al-Kibulan. It's called this, that, and the third. And I really can't believe that people fall for all of that. People come to me, oh, we shouldn't call it Nubian. We should call it this, that. Hey, don't complain to me. Talk to them. They're the ones that forced us into these corners. I can't call anything without someone saying, oh, well, I don't know what that is, or we should call it something else. The question is, what are we going to do about it now? We have identified this, but no one person can redefine it. It takes a group effort to redefine this, but it'll never get redefined as long as we keep running around talking about a Caucasian, an Aryan, and this and that, as if it was something real. There was no such thing as a Caucasian. There was no such thing as an Aryan, a Semitic, or Hamitic. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll check you guys out next time.